Good morning, everyone. It's Joker, and today we are back with another slime video. And today is going to be, I don't know if it's the last, but it's definitely getting towards the end of the updated 2023 Beginner's Guide. We've gone over quite a few things in this series, how to play, leveling up your units, what events you should take on in what order, gear. So now we're going to essentially put that all together into this video, which culminates in like everything that end game players are looking for, right? This is how I play the game. This is how the big sweaty tryhards play the game. This is what we use and do to optimize our runs so we can beat everything, so we know what to do, we know what we're looking for, and ideally it's just to, what the title says, it's supposed to min-max your team and your strategies. So this video might be fairly long. I will have timestamps going over the specific things that I'm going to talk about, because I do have a list of, so far it's 9 things that I've got bulleted over here. So it's probably going to be a long video. Timestamps will be there, so hopefully some of this information helps you out. This is geared towards more middle to late game, so this is assuming you've played, you understand the basic mechanics of the game, you've watched the other guides, you know what needs to happen, and this is just to further cement your knowledge in, getting better at this game. So with that said, let's get started on topic number 1. All right, so starting out, we're going to be going over awakened gear. We've done the normal gear guide, which is, the very basic gear, putting it on the right unit and everything, making sure the right weapon is attached and it's the same element, so you get that extra 20% damage bonus. These are very important things, don't get me wrong. But now we're going to be going over what needs to happen in the later stages of the game. So this gear is 6-star awakened gear. It has, shiny purple stars right here. It does not come this way, and I don't really talk about it in the beginning gear guide because it's not really for beginners. So in order to maximize your unit's damage, their defensive potential, and their HP, you need to start awakening your gear away from the normal, like down here where, let's see, it's just kind of yellow 6 stars right here, like this light sword. You need to start working on getting the sword to this one, this level 60 6-star awakened sword, because you can see the stats right here. This sword has a range that caps out at 419 attack, while this sword caps out at 739. So there's quite a bit of difference in between stats. And even the lowest, part, the minimum is still 655, while this one is, 375. So there's quite a large difference in between that. And that applies for all gear. So the jacket, right? It has 1778 as its maximum cap, but if we go take out and look at one of these other Earth jackets down here, it's only at 990, right? 990 versus 1700, it's quite a large jump right there. And then the same also applies for the accessories, regardless of what kind of accessory it is. So this accessory, 4433 HP, and then down here I should have non-awakened. Yeah, 44 versus 2500. Very, very big differences in stats, and that's what you're going to need in order to keep everyone alive in some of these much more difficult stages of events. So I have gear, I have a bunch of gear guides out, right? So we have, let's see, I think, yeah, we have this 6-star jacket, right? It's been leveled up, it's been evolved, it's been reforged, it's capped out at 990. We did that in the other gear guide. So now what we need to do is awaken this piece of gear using this button. So it would need another jacket of same quality. And this can only happen if it is leveled up, evolved, and reforged. You must have all 3 of these things done on the first part of the gear. Now, the second jacket, it needs to be 6-star and level 60. It does not have to be reforged. So I could make a jacket right now, and it could be at terrible stats. But as long as it's 6-star level 60, I can feed it into this new jacket and make a better one. It also requires these flames. So I call them little flame, medium flame, and big flame. Those are not the official names. Don't worry about it. But these flames are acquired from the Tower of Isis, Loop, whatever you want to call it. This is a stage that you can maybe start to take on as your beginner player down at the very, very low levels, But every time you get one of these chests, every time you clear a mini boss or an actual boss on the floor, you have a chance to receive some of those flames. And also, every time you beat an enemy, you get coins, which you can then use. So I've got 7,000. You could trade these in for flames. And every week there are discounted ones, and you can only buy a certain amount of them. And then there are just normal ones. I really wouldn't recommend buying the normal ones. They're, as you can see, they're like half off. So I would just buy these and then use them sparingly on specific units. But you're gonna need these flames to awaken your gear. So doing tower and loop loop is gonna be part of the end game process because you need awakened gear. It's not a I can kind of get by. It's like no, you need the awakened gear. Now, you don't have to make 1,000 sets of it right off the bat, right? You can use certain pieces here and there sparingly and put it on your most important units. But for here, we're going to awaken this piece, and we're going to use this jacket right here. I don't really care. So it's going to cost us another jacket, 15 small flames, 5 medium flames, and 1 big flame. And we're going to end some gold. So use enhanced equipment as material. Yes, I know I'm using it. It's kind of the rule. And we're combining these two. And now it starts off at Awakened 1 star. And now it has a brand new reroll set right here. So now you just do it again, right? You go through the normal process of leveling up your gear. It's going to take a lot more resources now. And you also have to reforge it again, which is really unfortunate. It's one of the not so great things about awakening your gear is that you have to reforge, and it's going to take a lot more of these now, so it needs 6 of these, and it can take 20, 30, like I think the last video was 30 of these. Let's find out what this costs. 19. Okay, well, honestly that's not terrible. So it took 19 reforges, but now it is at the maximum quote-unquote stat, so every time you leveled up, it'll just continuously be maxed out. But it's going to cost more cores. It's going to cost more hammers. It's going to cost platinum hammers eventually once you get to the 4th level, or the 4th star. And these are not easy things to come by. Gold hammers for newer players are not the easiest things to come by. So 2 more gold hammers to get to level 40, and then to go to 50 and 60, it's going to cost platinums. And platinums you get very sparingly. You can buy them from some shops. You can get them as rewards sometimes, but like, let's see. Friendship? Yeah, Friendship Bazaar, you can buy 1 a month for 700 friend points, right? Sometimes you get them from clearing certain quests, so like the Tempered Edges, if you clear them at certain difficulties, right? So you get the weapon, bronze, silver, gold, platinum, 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 platinum. You can get platinum hammers from that. You cannot farm platinum hammers, though. At least as of recording this video in October of 2023. You cannot farm platinum hammers. If you're watching this, a year from now, maybe, or 6-8 months from now, maybe you can. I don't know. But I'm only going off the information that we have currently. So, reforging gear, enhancing gear, and awakening gear up to a higher tier is going to be very important, and it applies for jackets, it applies for weapons, and since it does cost 2 pieces of gear, it's double, right? Because you need to make 2 jackets. Only one of them has to be totally maxed out. The other one can be crap stats, but it has to still be 6-star awake or 6-star and level 60. So it does cost twice the resources because you have to make 2. So I've made 2 here, 2 here, 2 here, 2, 2, 2, 2, 2. Everything that has a purple star, I've made 2 of in some way, shape, or form throughout my time playing this game. So it will take you a good amount of time to acquire those amount of resources. It probably took you a lot of time to get gear on everybody to begin with. So now it's going to take you even longer because now you need double the gear. So that is something you need to work towards. But, the same rules apply regardless if it's a jacket. If it's a bracelet, you need 2 bracelets. You need platinum hammers. You need flames. If I wanted to awaken this one right here, it still costs flames. It still costs another bracelet or necklace or whatever it is at the same 60 and 6-star done. And the same applies for jackets, which I should have a jacket down here somewhere. Yeah, like jacket right here. Awaken needs these flames. I don't have any other space jackets, so let's try a water jacket. Yeah, I have a water jacket I could use. So that is part 1 of making sure units are as potent and defensive as possible. All right, the next thing we're going to talk about is charms. And I just did a video maybe a couple days ago on what I think are the best charms to level up. Charms are something that are, I wouldn't say new, but they are still not the most common thing to have in the world, and especially not for newer players. Even some middle game players don't have all of these maxed out. There are quite a few number of charms, and there are a few ways to get them. The most important way is to play Valor Cup. So every single month, it's considered a season. At the end of the season, you are ranked, and based on your ranking overall, it's just a total cumulative score. You're not competing against anybody in normal Valor Cup. So like right here, I am max rank, and you can see the reward from being max rank is 300 crystals, 3 guaranteed 3-star charms, and as you progress like through the ranks, you'll get more, it'll get worse and worse technically. But the season, there's 16 days left. The weekly ranking, there's 2, and you get coins. And then the weekly defense, you also get coins, which you can spend in the shop to get more charms. Now there are other ways to get charms, but this is the most efficient way, is playing Valor Cup. Sometimes there will be stages in this, and it'll say charm guaranteed or something or whatever, and you can play those stages, and if you win, regardless of how you win, you can get a free charm. But spending some time in Valor Cup, making sure your stamina is not always capped out, even doing really, really low difficulty ones, will still get you more rank, and therefore it will give you more guaranteed rewards at the end of the season. And it's important to do this because charms do have a major, major impact on your playability because they have some very powerful effects. So if we go to the list right now, this one increases the ult gauge of the ally with the highest attack by 16%. You attach charms to your protectors. So every time you use your protector, whatever charm is activated, is attached, will become activated. So let's say we have this on Watermelon. She is a stacking protector. She's meant to be used on a blue team, which means if you get full hands of blues, you will have a lot of protection millims to use over the course of the fight. So if you can use millims 6 times, then that's 16 times 6 on your highest attacking unit, as far as their ult gauge is concerned. That's a lot of free ult gauge. It's not, you have to actually work towards it, but it is free. Or we have a healing charm. Heals the ally with the lowest HP by 24%. This is an invaluable charm pretty much everywhere in terms of survivability, especially in Valor Cup, because they generally only target the same person unless you swap them out and then they switch to somebody else. So it's very easy to heal up that one unit if you can get a protector. There are other charms that have value. Blue ult gauge charm by 40%. Blues don't give you a lot as far as ult is concerned. Well, this charm's going to give you 40% more, which can make or break a team. Or you can get more skill points on oranges, which we know oranges don't give a lot except for ults, because they're all focused on their own kind of gauge, right? But, if you have Toa, Protector Toa, she already gives skill point buffs on oranges. This charm will stack on top of that. So I think she gives like 50% extra skill points. This charm will give another 40%, so you get 90% extra skill points on charms. So making sure to work on these. There's also elemental buff ones, so earth attack. That's generic. If there's an earth unit, they get extra earth attack for that one turn that you use your protector on. Sometimes they last for multiple turns. Some have pierce power. Some have crit power. Let's see, where's my crit one? Right here. So there are a lot of charms. Not all of them are created equal. I did do a video going over the ones that I thought are best for most people, so make sure to watch that in a separate video. But making sure to at least start working on charms or even equipping a charm, even if it's level 1, right? It's still an extra effect that you didn't have before then, right? So maybe you don't have 40% extra ult gauge on blues. Maybe it's only 10%. But that 10% could make or break your run, right? You're just a little tiny bit off, a little sliver away from having your ult. Well, maybe an extra 10% here and there would have helped you. 40% definitely would have helped you, but 10% still. It can make a difference. So always be sure to equip charms. They are also giving extra stats to the protector, which just makes them more powerful, which in turn makes your team more powerful, more tanky, more HP, more attack, and even if they aren't leveled up, they're still given extra stats. So it's literally free as long as you equip one. And sometimes it doesn't, if you only have one charm and it makes no difference, at least you get extra stats. and maybe you get an extra buff somewhere here and there. Even if it doesn't apply to you, at least you're getting some extra stats. So make sure to always have a charm active if you have the availability of them. And then, like I said, the Valor Cup shop also has charms that you can buy every single month. So I bought out all these. There's 15 of these. There's, I think, 30 of these because I bought some. But as long as you play Valor Cup, you will get a decent amount of coins, especially as you clear the first ranks initially. You'll get a lot of it. You'll get crystals, you'll get free charms, and then you can just work towards leveling them up. So it's very important to use your charms. Even if they don't really make sense for your team, they are free stats at the end of the day. All right, the third topic for today is making sure you understand what each skill does for your units. When you build a team, you want them to synergize well. If you want a stacking protector team, you want a lot of blue orb changers, you want teams with big time damage buffs to help you do big mommy damage or big daddy damage, right? You don't want a big stacking team with like 15-point skills that don't really enhance your damage too much, right? Because, I mean, you could put Rain on a stacking team, because what does she do? She gives, she deals instant damage, and then she lowers space resistance and increases your crit damage by 15%. That's not a bad skill, but when there are units like, say, Violet, and her skill is 80 points, but lowers ult resistance by 55% and crit damage by 40%, like, that's going to do a lot more. And you have a lot of points, you know, generally speaking, on a blue team that you can afford an 80-point skill. Now, there's no problem with using Rain. It's just that you get less return out of it. And while the difference is you could use that skill maybe a bunch of times versus the one time with Violet, ideally on your nuke turn, you're supposed to end the fight there. So you want to make sure your nuke does lots of damage, because generally those bosses have lots of HP. And a small time buff really wouldn't help you all that much in terms of trying to do millions of damage. So it is important to know and figure out in what circumstance, on what team build you want. Violet, you're not going to use this skill on a burst team that has, you know, a limited point cap of 100 because it costs 80 and you have no other skills to use, right? But she makes sense on a blue stacking team. While this Milim right here, she is more focused on a burst damage team, which is why her skills are low cost, 25. 15. Same with, let's say Sokka. Right, she gives a generic attack buff for 25 points. Even her future hand of greens is only 40, which guarantees the next hand is all greens. So that could, you know, delete RNG from your next turn because it's guaranteed that the entire hand is green. So making sure to really optimize your effects versus costs for your specific team builds is something very, very important. Now, the other thing that I really, really, really want to talk about is gauge increase. And that is going to apply even during this specific meta right now, where we have this free-to-play Ranga, right? And if we look at his orb change, changes 2 souls into souls of oranges, right? Increases all orange gauges by 10%. All of them. So that's protection, that's skill points, and that is alt gauge. 10%. It's really good. But then if we go look at another unit who has a similar orb change, Hinata, and look at hers. So, changes 1 blue and 1 green into 2 orange. So it's essentially the same skill, you're still converting to oranges. However, increases orange orb alt gauge until the end of battle by 5% at a cap of 100. So instead of the orange orb being, you know, buffing all of your gauges, she only specifically buffs extra alt gauge gain. While it does stack permanently, it can mess a few things up. So let me go into battle really fast and let me give you an example. Okay, so we have Hinata, right? We were just talking about her. We have this hand, which is perfect for her. It's 1 green and 1 blue, and Hinata changes 1 green and 1 blue into 2 oranges. But remember that she's buffing alt gauge, not anything else. So even though we use this skill, and we have a full hand, and we have maximum, you know, starting protection gauge with this team, this hand of oranges does not give us a full protector going into the next turn, right? And that's because we're missing that little bit extra 10% that every blue orb would give towards a protection gauge, right? So if we come back and we use a different team, this time we have Ranga, who's going to change these two orbs because they're both wielder of magic. Now it is more specific as the orb change, but Ranga's extra effect is that he buffs all gauges for orange by 10%. So if we do this, and now if we send a full 6 hand of oranges, you can see that we have just enough to get a protector turn 2. And that is a difference of 10% right there, right? 10%, it doesn't seem like too much when you're like, whatever, fine. But it can make a huge difference because having Protector Milim on turn 2 and not having Milim turn 2 is a huge deal. So whenever you're building your teams and you want orb changers, you do want to make sure that you are looking at what their effects do specifically. And if one does an orb change and it only buffs certain things and one buffs everything, which one do you want to use first? Do you want the extra alt gauge or skill points or whatever, or do you want the generic increase in everything else? Because here, it's going to be very important that we do that because, depending on what next turn looks like, we might need Milim to give us, get out of a terrible hand of RNG. And, look at that. We have 2 oranges, 2 blues, and 2 greens. It's not great when the stage nerfs blues and greens. So having Milim right here guarantees that we now have full 6 orbs, plus we have the extra pierce, plus we have the extra 40 points, and now here we go. We're looking good. So it is very important to really notice what your skills do and understand what they do and when you should really use them. Like this skill reset decreases the skill cost for by 20 for Vanguard allies. Cannot go below each skill's initial cost. So every time you use a skill, it goes up by 20 points, essentially. So what this does is it resets one level, and then increases all souls skill point increase by 10%. Can only use a skill once per battle. So this skill is going to reset the cost of any skill, and then give us extra skill points on any orb. Now, I could use this now, right? I have a skill that's a higher cost, but would it be efficient of me to do that? Because you can only use it once. So is it better for me to use it now, or is it better to maybe use a bunch of other skills like this, and then maybe we swap the hero out for Hinata, and now we'll use her future orange hand, just like what Sokka has, but for oranges, and now it's probably a better time to use this skill, because now we have 1, 2, 3, 4 skills to reset that are fairly important, and now look at that. Everything's back down to base cost. And if we check, increases your gauge increase by 20%, increases your skill point increase by 50%. Now the 10% is blacked out because we've used a skill that already gives us extra skill points, which is Ranga's skill, right? Increases Soul of Secrets skill point increase, increases all souls skill point increase. So obviously 10% is not as good as 50%, so that's why it's blacked out. But still, you got to keep that in mind. When to use certain skills. What is a good time? Right here, it was very important for us to use this future Hand of Orange because we're not going to get another Milim. We're going to get barely half a Milim right here. But next turn, it's going to give us a full hand. Well, maybe, because we have some alts coming in. But it would give us multiple oranges. Guaranteed oranges outside of alts. Right there. So yeah, 2 alts, but also 4 more oranges. That was a good time to use it because now we can do this and we can get closer to another protector. If we had 6, maybe we could have done it, maybe not, but you got to know what your skills do. So when you get a new unit, when you're building a team, make sure to read what they do and make sure it goes well with the rest of the team. That's what I'm trying to get at. The next thing I want to talk about is making sure that you're trying to optimize who your protection character is, your leader, because generally the team revolves around the protector. The battle units would fall underneath what the protector does. So, like, let's say Milim, she's the new unit, she's the new protector. She's doing stuff related to orange orbs and pierce, right? So you'd ideally want to build a team that is orange focused, low cost, because she doesn't raise your cap. She gives you 40 skill points, but that gives you a soft cap of 140 or 180 if you get very, very lucky. So you only have a certain amount of points you can use. So lower cost skills are going to be a lot better here than trying to use like one big skill and nothing else. So an orange focused, pierce, and a magic team, because that is the requirement. So orange orbs, magic characters, allies, pierce rate by 100%. So there's three different things right there that you have to keep in mind, because if you bring a whole bunch of units that are green orb changers, it's like, will that really help you out? Not really. If they're physical, then they're not going to get this pierce rate. So, and if you're not, on a pierce focused team, like if you don't have pierce power, you're not really using the protection skill to its highest advantage. Now, if we were to go to Protector Frey, then maybe, she's doing essentially almost the same thing as Milim. She's doing an orb change, but this time to green orbs, and she's giving physical allies guaranteed crits while raising your skill point. So she's still capped at the 140 or 180 because she's giving you 40 every time you use her. But now we're on a green focused team, and for physical characters and for crit. So green orb changers gonna be good. Physical characters who can get the crit, and then crit damage support is really good here. So you don't want to bring a whole bunch of orange, orbs and pierce units and magic allies, because they wouldn't really work towards Frey. So making sure you understand what teams you need to use to maximize your protectors is going to be very, very important. And the second thing that you need to take note of is what they lead in general. So especially with the older 5 stars that you'll probably end up pulling here and there because they're all in the general pool now, you can see that sometimes they buff space and wind. So let's take a look at that. The skill increases space attack by 16, wind attack by 8%. And this is if Cabby is your primary protector, and like you're going to use Cabby as part of your team build. And if he's a support, he gives a 5% buff to both space and wind. So ideally, if you're using Cabby, you'd want to use a damaging unit that falls underneath space or wind. Now, you don't always have to. Like, it's not like a guaranteed, like, you must do this. Because obviously, as long as it's a green-focused team, Cabby's going to work, and it doesn't really matter who is underneath them. But in order to get that little extra damage out of it, you'd want space or wind. The same thing can be applied to, Bride Shizu, right? She's buffing light attack by 12%, physical attack by 10%. So how Cabby was buffing 2 different elements, of which you can only have 1 element per unit, right? So you're either getting the space buff or the wind buff. Shizu is now buffing light and physical attack. So if you happen to be a light unit, but you're magic, okay, you get 12% light attack. If you're a physical unit, and you're dark, you get 10% physical attack. But if you fall underneath both of those categories, like Bride Shion, who came out with Bride Shizu, then they're both physical and they're both light. So you then get 12% and 10%, which will then just increase your damage by that much, right? So you could put, this is a Pierce team. You could put the new Shinsha, right? Because she is a burst team. She is a magic unit that wants Pierce, right? She has Pierce, well, Ranga has Pierce power, but you can put her under Shizu, but she's not light, she's not physical, and she's not really geared towards green orbs. Shizu is changing 3 and 3 into 6 greens. Shinsha gets extra attack every time you use an orange orb. So you could put her under Shizu, but would it really be the best idea, considering that they have very opposite effects on their skills? They don't really want to be run together unless you have no other option, because you're not getting the damage buff, you're not getting the physical buff, you're not getting the the attack buff from sending orange orbs because Shizu is changing to greens all the time. So really, really got to pay attention to that. And then really, when you get into the EX protectors, then it starts becoming very, very important to keep in mind who you're using, because now you get this extra 60% damage buff to a certain attribute if you're on a certain category. So this is Otherworld Legend Force characters do an extra 60% damage to water enemies. So if you happen to fall under Otherworld Legend, let's go check that out really fast. And you're fighting a water enemy. Okay, that's Protector. That was a bad example. Otherworld Legend, and you're fighting a water enemy, then all of these characters immediately get a 60% damage buff, even if they're not wind, right? Because, Milim, Raphael, Veldora, they're not type advantage against water. Shuna is, but it still doesn't matter, because Milim, Raphael, Veldora will still get a 60% damage buff because they fall underneath Protector Velzard and that Otherworld Legend buff. Now, if you happen to be Wind and an Otherworld Legend, like Shuna, then you will just do even more damage because now you have type advantage alongside this 60% damage buff. And that means you'll do even more to them, which makes sense considering that Shuna is a damage unit. You want them to be type advantage with the extra buff here. That's why Shinsha is water, because the current beatdown battle boss is fire. So Shinsha falls under the Milim Protector skill, which gives that extra 60% damage buff. And she's water, which means she's already effective against fire enemies to begin with, because Shinsha is under the Wielder of Magic Force. So fire enemies, 60% extra damage. Okay. And then, as another side, increases Octagram Demon Lord or Wielder of Magic characters' attack and defense now. So you have to fall under these two categories, but you will get a 20% attack and defense buff, which is huge because if we look at the other older protectors, they're not giving defense at all. They're just giving attack. Light attack, magic attack, space attack, wind attack, light and earth attack down here. Like, they didn't start giving defense on their leader skills until the EX units started coming out, which means that you will be tankier. You can survive in a fight longer, as long as you fall under one of those two teams. So, Wielder of Magic and Octagram Demon Lord. So we already have, let's see, reset. So, Octagram Demon Lord, where... That's Octagram Bazaar. Hold on. Octagram Demon Lord and Wielder of Magic. Wielder of Magic. Why can I not find you? There you are. All right. Cool. Confirm. All right. So now, all these characters are going to get an extra 20% attack and defense buff from that Milim, because they are on one of the categories. Murin's Wielder of Magic. Valentine's an Octagram Demon Lord. Makes sense. Adelman is Wielder of Magic. Milim is an Octagram Demon Lord. So you got to play to those strengths so you can be tankier, so you can do more damage. So maximizing your protector skills and what they do versus what your individual units do is a very, very big key thing to keep in mind. All right, the next thing we're going to talk about is unit placement as far as team building is concerned. So here is the Goddess of Destiny team. It's a fairly good team. It's a burst damage team. It's not meant to go 8 or 10 turns. It's meant to do a lot of damage very, very quickly and take out the boss very, very quickly. But if we take a look at where I have the units placed right now, we have the hero, we have Trya, we have Rain, we have Shuna, and we have Sokka. So for this specific team build, I want Shuna as my strongest unit. So therefore, I want to put my strongest support under her, which means I want them to be the same type so they get that big time 6% extra stats across the board because both her and her support are light. Sokka is wind, Hinata is wind. Rain here is water, but she's attached to Earth Milim because I want these three units as supports because they're the big three for protection skill on turn 1. So Rain doesn't match up with Milim. Trya doesn't match up with Milim. The hero does happen to match up with Gazel. So that's pretty good right here. So at least she's getting some extra stats. But if I wanted to maybe, sometimes, when this beatdown came out, right, it was a set starting hand for Trya, where it was 4 greens, 1 blue, and 1 orange, which made sense because Trya does that conversion skill. So it wasn't anything to worry about because we could just use the skill and then send her away. And she's a support unit, which means that I don't really need her to have the highest stats because she's not here to do damage. She's going to live mostly in the back line until I need her for some orb changing, and then she's probably going to go away again. So it's more important for me to have my 2 damage dealing units, my 2 tankiest units, to have good supports, to have the highest attack stats right here. Now, what I could do, and what sometimes does happen, is that maybe I want to use this team, but it's in a stage that doesn't have a set starting hand. It's all turn 1 RNG, the orbs or whatever they could be. So is it really good to have Trya up front now? Probably not, because Trya's other skill is that she changes her own orbs to greens, which can be Very, very useful. Just like what Water Rimuru does, he changes all of his orbs to blue right here. And then Violet changes all her orbs to blue as well. So these units are best used in the back because you never know what the game is going to give you. And if you can plan ahead and be like, oh, we have an entire 6-hand of something, or we have five oranges and 1 green, and all 5 of those units are single, or all 5 of those orbs are a single unit, then we can then bring in Trya and change all to green, which is what this team wants to do. So it's better to have Trya in the back, and especially on turn 1 when there's no set starting hand, maybe we do this instead. So we'll switch the hero out for Shuna, and we'll put Gazel, which will hurt her stats a little bit, but also that means that now we can swap the hero over here for Dark Milim, and now Trya can exist in the backline, so when the battle starts up on turn 1, and you don't have a good hand, but you have something that Trya can work with, you can bring her in for one of these units, and then you have a full 6-hand of green. And even now, you could then, take out Raphael and give her Megamine or something like that. And now she'll have a higher stat buff, and she'll be a little bit tankier. So making sure to place units in the back that have skills that could be beneficial. Like, you could make the case for either of these 2 units, because Trya converts her own orbs to green. Shuna steals orbs from other people to give herself more. So if you have 3 orbs of somebody up here, it doesn't matter who, you could then bring Shuna in, steal all those into 6-hand. That can work too. So you have options with this team, which is why it's a good example. But you want to make sure that whoever you're trying to steal orbs with or change orbs, they're best used in the back, so you can make the adjustment, so you can see who has what, and then make your play. Because if we have both of them up front and none of them have orbs, well then you're kind of stuck. If you have Trya up front and you have these 2 units in the back who can't really do much, and you have no orbs for them, or they're all a random hodgepodge of crap, well, you've kind of defeated the purpose of having this unit with the orb steal. She would have been better served in the back and then brought in to change all those troublesome orbs. So that is something else to keep in mind when building a team. Place your biggest damaging units in the back with their biggest supports that matter a lot. And then have orb changing units spaced here and there, maybe also in the back depending on how the team is being run. I do have a video going over this more in depth. It's an early video, but it's still fairly good, so make sure to check that out if you want to. Alright, one of the last things that I want to talk about, and it's probably one of the biggest, is understanding the traits of your units. Now, traits are something that you can only acquire once a unit gets 1 dupe or 3 dupes. So Valentine right here, she's level 100. This is where she starts out at if you pull her. Her trait down here is locked, and it is when you unleash a 6 combo of blues, she gets extra crit damage for the next turn, which is also available in the support. So if she herself is on a team and she participates in a 6 orb send of blues, the next turn she will get extra crit damage. Or if she is the support for a unit, so let's say you have Megamine and then also Valentine, if Megamine was to send 6 blues, then the next turn she would get the crit damage buff from Valentine because she is a support for Megamine. Now, unfortunately, I don't have a dupe for this Valentine, which means I don't have access to that trait. And a lot of newer players probably won't have access to traits as well. But when you start getting dupes in your units, it really needs to come to a head that you learn what their traits are, because some of them are really, really good, and some of them are really, really bad. So starting off, let's look at the ones with arguably the best trait in the world, in the entire game. Earth Milim, Dark Milim, and Gazel. So at level 80, because that's where the old units start out at, she has nothing, right? She is an orb changer, and she gives you defense. Cool, whatever. But when you get her trait, when you start getting dupes, when your troop contains 3 or more battle characters, increases protection gauge by 11 at the start of the fight. And this is at max power, right? So if we check out what it was to begin with, it was 7 points at the start of battle. And people always ask me, Joker, how do you start out with so much protection gauge turn 1? It's because of this unit right here. Because on turn 1, at the start of the battle, I get an extra 11 points of protection gauge. And then if you give, this Milim has 11. Let's see, where's Gazel? Gazel has the same exact trait. He gives 11 points at the start of the turn if there's 3 battle characters. Dark Milim is the same. They have never given us another unit that does this turn 1. And it's because it's too good, right? So, this is why. We have 33 points of protection gauge on turn 1 between these 3 units. And that is why they're almost always my starting units. Well, I have them all flipped around here from the last example, but Dark Milim, Earth Milim, Gazel. Dark Milim, Earth Milim, Gazel. Dark Milim, Earth Milim, Gazel. They are always here because it is so important to start your fight with a butt ton of protection gauge. Now, moving on to units with different traits, let's look at Shizu, the new 2-year anniversary Shizu that came out. We have her at level 104, which means that we have her trait because she has 1 dupe. So her trait is, when you have 3 more battle characters, increases skill points by 3 every 2 turns. So turn 2, turn 4, turn 6, etc., etc. You will just automatically get an extra 3 points. And if I had 2 more dupes of Shizu, then it'd be up to 5 points every 2 turns. And this could be very important for a team that is kind of strapped for points, that doesn't have blues that are buffed by 500%, you know? So having extra skill points just passively is good. If we look at the hero right here, her trait is every 3 turns you get an extra 6 points of protection gauge. So turn 3, 6, 9, 12, you get an extra 6 points of protection gauge. You could couple that with maybe, say, this Aqua right here, who also gives protection gauge every 3 turns. 5 every 3 turns. So on the 3rd turn, we're going to get the protection trait from Aqua, and we're going to get the protection trait from the hero, and that's just extra gauge right there for free, because we have the traits, and we understand what those traits do. The new Hinata, her trait is a little bit different. She doesn't give us extra protection gauge or skill points. She gives herself extra ult gauge from the start of the turn to turn 3. So for the first 3 turns of the fight, if she is up front, you get 7%, 14%, 21% extra ult gauge for free just by her existing and sitting there, on top of whatever you gain from sending orbs. And that can go up to 11% if you have multiple dupes in her. So it is important to remember what units do for their traits. This Shinsha doesn't have a dupe. We don't have her trait, but it'd be really good if we had her trait, because she would give us protection gauge every 2 turns, right? For up to 6, which would mean, in the perfect world, this team would have starting protection gauge from these 3, it would have turn 2 protection gauge from Shinsha, it would have turn 3 protection gauge from the hero and Aqua, and that means you pretty much always have protection gauge. And then after turn 3, it's turn 4, which means that Shinsha will kick in again. And then turn 5, there's nothing. But turn 6, we'll get Aqua and the hero again. So we're always rotating protection gauge by using the traits. So having traits is very important. Guy and Megumin, they have protection traits as well. Guy is every 3 turns, Megumin is every 2 turns. Now let's look at a not so good trait. EX Mirren. When you have max HP, increases zone defense by 7% at the start of turn. Available in support formation. So this requires you to be at max HP, which is going to be difficult because you get hit. Now you can heal up to max HP, and then when you start the fight, you can have that extra defense. But generally, this is only going to be good for turn 1. And then it's never really going to apply anywhere else, unless you have brought a healer who can outpace the damage that you're taking. That's not really a good trait. A lot of the free-to-play characters don't have good traits. So this free-to-play Water Gobta right here, I don't even know what his trait is, actually. When you have 50% or lower HP, increases his own defense by 9%. Okay, that requires something. You have to have 50% or lower HP, which may be scary. And you get defense. Alright, it makes you slightly more tanky. Okay, cool, whatever. But make sure when you're pulling units and you're building your team, you understand how traits work, what traits you have active as far as your support slots are concerned, and then find a way to maximize them. Okay, this is an example right here. So, we have the protection trio right here. We have Trainee, doesn't have a good trait. Yom doesn't really have a good trait. Isis doesn't really have a good trait. Valentine's trait is at the start of the fight, you get extra skill points, right? Increases skill points by 6 at the start of battle, available in support. So, at the start of battle, which means she would have to be up front. Now, is she up front right now? No. Am I maximizing her trait? No. Do I want extra skill points on turn 1? Yes. So what I would do is I would swap out maybe Isis or something for Valentine. Now that also means taking away their same type supports, because now it's dark and wind instead of dark, wind. So you're losing some stats there, but you do have the capability now of starting with an extra 6 skill points. So now you're starting at 33% or 33 points of protection plus an extra 6 skill points. You have to make that conscious decision of how you want this team to run. Personally, for this specific team, I would put Valentine in the back again, because I don't really care about the starting skill points. But that's just me for this specific team. It will change based on the units you have that actually have dupes in them, and how you want that team to run. So that is something to keep in mind. It is very, very important. Traits are one of the biggest killers in this game, on having a good trait versus a bad trait versus having no trait. So please be aware of the units that you have and what they can do with their dupes. Alright, the last thing is the quickest thing. That's why I left it for the end. But when you're taking on an event, make sure you understand not only what your team does as a whole, between their skills and their leader skills and the traits and, same typings and all that, but also what the enemy does, because that will factor into how you build your team. So this Gazel stage right here, right? The enemy is light, so you want to use a dark team. Okay, fine. But we look at his info and look at what he does. So he's got 350k HP. It's quite a bit for a new player. 8.8k attack, 12.7k defense. He's quite tanky. He also increases his own defense even more, so he becomes even more tanky, and he nerfs oranges. Damage by 80%, engage by 80% for 4 turns. So, that already should tell you I should probably not bring a lot of orange-focused units. Right? Because you're going to do less damage and you're going to get less gauge for it, which oranges really don't give a lot of gauge already, so it's really going to hurt. So, maybe a green team, maybe a blue team. He increases his own crit resistance and pierce resistance for 6 turns. Now, this is not the entirety of the fight, so you can certainly bring a pierce or a crit unit and then wait for this debuff to go away. Unless he reapplies it. I don't know. You'll have to find out when you play the stage, and you'll have to watch what turn does this buff go away, what turn does it start, when should I use the pierce or crit. He has a chance to seal attack, crit, and pierce up for 4 turns, which you can't really do much about. But he also then starts to nerf blue orbs. So he's nerfing blue somewhere, and he's nerfing oranges immediately. So that pretty much leads you down the rabbit hole of, I should probably bring a green-focused team. He also has a minus 20% resistance against magic. So magic units are going to do a little bit extra damage to him versus physical. So maybe you want to bring a green-focused magic team. Okay. What else does he do? He gives himself his physical attack resistance, therefore also cementing that you don't really want to bring that, but also gives magic resistance, which again, this is only for 2 turns. So this comes into you playing the stage and realizing and understanding when he uses this buff and when it leaves to make sure you can maximize your damage output. And then he does an AoE for 30%, which you can't really do anything about. He's just going to do it. And he's also a single target. But understanding the nuances of each boss and what they tend to want you to use is very important. Because if we go to a different stage, let's say, Shuna right here, what does she do? She has 346k attack, 9,000 attack and defense, more defense, lowers our attack on the first turn, and turn 3 technically, and has pierce resistance and crit resistance by 70% forever. Forever. And then nerfs greens. So, probably don't want to bring a green team. Nerfs our attack again, increases her own attack and fire attack, and then her pierce and stuff and like that. This happens towards the end of the fight. This happens sequentially over the fight. But realistically, what you're paying attention to is this pierce resistance and crit resistance, and her resistance up here. So she's a fire enemy. Probably want to bring a water team. She has a 20% physical resistance. I don't know if you really want to bring a physical team for this, but she also has crit resistance for the end of the fight. Now, good thing there is a water unit that happens to seal enemies' crit resistance in the Water Hinata right here. Her other skill, chance to seal crit resistance up on a single target 100%. because she wants to crit. She gives herself crit damage. You pair her with Water Shion, who gives crit. We look at her real fast. Increases all allies' crit rate by 100%. Well, if you use this skill and you give everybody crit, but you don't seal the crit resistance on Shuna, your crit is going to hit like a feather because she has all that resistance and you've just intentionally nerfed yourself. So what you want to do is you want to give a unit crit and also use Hinata to seal that resistance, therefore allowing you to crit at full power. You don't want to bring Pierce because no one seals Pierce rate, actually, to this day. No one seals Pierce rate. So not a good team to bring, Pierce. So make sure you look through the battle, especially if it's a difficult fight, and you understand what each boss is pushing you to use and what you should use and should not use in that specific fight. And it's all going to vary, and you may not have all the options to deal with it, but as long as you can hit some of those options, you can always find a way to get around it. It's called Vengeance, by the way. The way to get around it is Vengeance, but that's not really for this video. So that's really what I wanted to talk to you about today. It's almost an hour-long video. Again, if you have stuck through it, congratulations. You may have come out of here a slightly better player. Thank you for listening to my annoying voice for the past hour, and almost an hour. But hopefully you've learned something. Hopefully this video has helped you and helped other people and helped you help other people in your knowledge now. I think that's going to do it for the beginner's guide, at least the numbered beginner's guide. I'll maybe have some other videos out that lean towards beginner stuff, but not technically labeled that. But this should be the culmination, right? We've gone over everything regarding the game, how to play, certain things about gear and dupes and Tempest and events and all this stuff that we've covered today. That should be a pretty comprehensive guide. But if you think I'm still missing something, please let me know in the comments and I will attempt to cover it. But that's it from me, guys. Take it easy and welcome to Slime.